Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night to you and all that kind of stuff. It's just gone 8 p.m. here in the UK. It's 4 p.m. in the US, East Coast time. This is Paul English Live, number 9. And on tonight's show, a little bit about Guy Fawkes, a little bit about Napoleon, yeah, seriously, and quite a lot about a gentleman called David Fleming and the independentalliance.org. It being that time of the year, didn't seem right to leave poor old Guy Fawkes out of the mix, so we're just going to have a brief word or two about him. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. It's November, isn't it? November the 2nd, and October and September shot by. So here we are in November, only a few weeks away in the US from Thanksgiving, and only a few more weeks away from the end of the year and the Christmas holiday season. So good to be back with you again. These weeks fly by. They do for me anyway, and maybe they're doing the same for you. As I said in the intro, we need to say a little bit about Guy Fawkes. You're listening to Paul English Live here at paulenglishlive.com. If you head over there, you can pick up all the sort of connections into the different channels that we're going out on. The main one being, of course, WBN324.com, where we're pleased to be here. But, of course, we're a slightly different hour because we've had a wonderful clock change over the weekend. Our clocks went back here in the UK and mainland Europe, Saturday just gone, or Sunday morning just gone. So we're now running around at a 4-hour difference between here in the UK and US East Coast time. So time zones are, we've just started, just gone 4 o'clock in the US East Coast, 3 o'clock Central, 2 o'clock Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific. So this is about as near time-wise as we're ever going to be. We're never going to be closer than this. Isn't that marvellous? I bet you all feel a nice, wonderful, warm feeling of connectedness with everything that's going on. So there we go. So hence the slightly aberrated hour this week. But everything's going to return back to normal next week because I understand North America is doing its clock changes too next weekend. And they are a pain in the bum, aren't they? I don't like them very much. I find this one far more difficult than the one coming out. When we put the clocks forward and I lose sleep, I seem to quite like that. Supposedly gaining sleep never sits very well with me. I mean, the dark nights come, of course, which is unavoidable. But, you know, you'd think that if we're going to do the changes of the clock, call me practical or something, don't you think it would be sensible if the whole of the Northern Hemisphere did it all at the same time? I know it's wacky, isn't it? It's radical ideas like that that can get you locked up and your life ruined, all that kind of stuff. So I mentioned earlier we'd give a brief shout out to one Guido Fawkes, more commonly known as Guy Fawkes. And it's a tradition over here in England that's long-standing because Fawkes is famous. No, actually, he's more than famous. He's infamous, which is, I understand, more famous than being famous, for being one of the plotters in what was the Gunpowder Plot. And in a way, the echoes of that plot are rather relevant to tonight's guest. Not that he's a gunpowder plotter. He'll be on in about 10 or 15 minutes, I think. And because I've just got a couple of things to go through. But you may recall, no doubt you did, I don't know if you were around at the time, but in 1605, Fawkes, along with a crew of people headed up by, I think it's Catesby, was the ringleader of the whole thing. They were a bit cross with what was happening in England with regards to the religious limitations on Catholics, and rightly so, really, in the sense that, and I've mentioned it here before, what's known as the Great Reformation really should be called the Great Devastation. There's a problem, I would suggest, with nearly all organised religions these days, and there's obviously the history of them shows that there's been pretty much a problem with them up and down the ages as well, and they've tended to get in the way of the actual good truths that we all need to get access to. However, that aside, Fawkes, I also have another connection with Fawkes, as some of you know, because I drone on about it, and also my little image is indicative of it. I come from Yorkshire, and so did Fawkes. How about that? He was born in York, which we all used to say should have been the capital of England anyway, but of course it turned out not to be. That honour, or is it now disreputable honour, falls upon London, old London town, which of course is not too much of an English town or city anymore, is it, from what I keep seeing with the breakdown figures of who lives there. Hey-ho, but Fawkes was a very brave fighter and fought on continental Europe, and interestingly, he wasn't born a Catholic. His mother remarried, and she married a Catholic, and he then became a Catholic when he was about 19 or 20 years of age. And he was a man of great courage and great fighting abilities, so they brought him in because he wasn't well known in England. And his job, he obviously didn't succeed at this, was to take down 5 to 10 barrels of gunpowder. They say in some cases it's way, way more than that, and place them underneath the Houses of Parliament. This is in 1605. And on November the 5th, so I'm a few days early with this coming Sunday, of course, here in the UK, on November the 5th, he was due to light the fuse and stand back, whilst literally most of the establishment figures, including the King, James I, and his wife, were to be blown sky high. So it's quite a serious attempt to rearrange the affairs of the nation, you could say. And he unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, was discovered with a matter of hours to go. And of course, he was subsequently tortured, hellishly, I imagine, not without good reason. People, of course, don't like the idea that you're going to blow them up. That's quite understandable. And he spilled the beans, and he was due to be hung, drawn, and quartered. But he, when he came to trial, which I think was in the early part of the following year, January, when he was taken to the scaffold, it says he slipped and fell off, or maybe he jumped off or whatever, but he certainly fell from this high scaffold and he broke his neck and killed himself, therefore robbing the crowd of the great spectacle of seeing him wriggling around on the end of a rope. Nevertheless, that didn't put them off. They still hung him, even though he was dead, and they also drew and quartered him. It was the favourite pastime of the day. So those savage instincts are probably still lurking around in certain parts. We'd all like to think not, but you never know. You never can tell. So that's what happened to Guy Fawkes. And over here in the UK, it's been a big deal ever since. Everybody would make these little stuffed up models called Penny for the Guy. As a child, I used to do this. You got begging with this sort of mannequin that you make up because, we're all very, very excited that it didn't happen and God save the king and all that kind of stuff. Certainly that was the sentiment back then, in 1605. I don't know whether it's necessarily the sentiment now in 2023. And in fact, we've probably got an awful lot more to have grievances about than they did even back then. Nevertheless, this is carried on. So it's known as Fireworks Night over here. although it's been kind of on the wane, I think, recently. And they have been trying to beef up Halloween, which to me personally is a complete non-event. I'm totally disinterested in it. It was silly when we were young. We weren't interested in turnips and all that kind of stuff. It was nonsense. We were just waiting for bonfire night so that we could let off rockets at our friends up and down the street. That was much more fun. Anyway, there you go. So this Sunday, rain willing, and it's been raining all over England like mad for the last week, and we're told that lots more, all natural, I suppose. I don't know what to believe, really. It is the season of rain. That people will be loosing off fireworks everywhere. So there you go. And that's the image that you see for today's show, which is really rather spectacular, I think. I mean, we plow through these images during the week and try and find something relevant or something nifty or just something to inspire us. And so the whole show is not about Guy Fawkes, but also those of you who are familiar with the film V for Vendetta will see that is really where it's drawn from. In fact, the whole of the mask of V for Vendetta is inspired by the clothing of Fawkes and his accomplices in the Gunpowder Plot. Anyway, it's a fascinating and rather brutal part of British history or English history, as many parts are. Now, so that's one little bit of history out of the way, because we're going to get onto current events very soon. But it's a good theme, right? I might start mentioning it later on when David joins us very soon. Napoleon. You know me, I keep banging on about this. I have no idea why. It is purely because of the film. But I've been reading a little bit more about the French Revolution. It's going to turn into a joke, this. I'm going to be some sort of online eccentric about it, but never mind. But not so much this week. Last week, I think I mentioned a book by a chap called McNair Wilson, a British MP who wrote a book on Napoleon's life in 1936. I think it was 36. And he mentioned at the beginning of that book that there was a book he'd discovered, which was, or he'd come across it. He said, this is the first book that's been written with the knowledge of a book by a guy called General Caulaincourt. It's like cauliflower, Caulin-Court. And Caulaincourt wrote a book called With Napoleon in Russia. The Memoirs of General de Caulaincourt, Duke of Vicenza, or Vicenza, Vicenza. And so I was going to try and buy a copy, but it's not in print. Hint, hint. Any enterprising people out there, maybe I'm one of them. I don't know what demand there's going to be for this. Maybe there's going to be huge demand after the film comes out at the end of this month. I mean, maybe we can all go Napoleon bonkers. Maybe we could all start selling the hats, right? Maybe the hat's going to come in. We'd all walk around with our hands inside our waistcoat pockets like jolly old good Freemasons and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really want to bring myself to spend 75 or 80 quid on an old copy. But because they'd been printed or translated into English in about 1920, which is about 100 years or so after they were written. And the story of the documents is fascinating as well, because the town in which Caulaincourt was buried and where his archive of notes were buried was bombed heavily during World War I. And they found this cask, and it took them ages to open it. And then they came across literally masses of things that he had written. And he was a prolific note taker, like every day. And I understand that Napoleon was similar. I think he wrote something like 15 to 20 letters a day, every day of his life. So he's basically like the equivalent of being on the internet, on Twitter, except you've got quills and gallons of ink, I suppose, or you're dictating it to people. And these things were finally translated, I believe, in the 1920s, which is why McNair Wilson was able to get hold of them and read them and then write his history of Napoleon with them in mind, which I haven't read. I haven't read McNair Wilson's book. I may do, I may not. But I got hold of Caulaincourt's book. I got it as a Kindle version for a couple of quid, really, from Amazon, because, as I said, I wasn't too keen to spend such an amount of money on a book I didn't know what it was going to be like. It's astonishing. And I say that probably a bit too much now. It's going to lose its meaning. It's an astonishing book because he's literally with Napoleon all the time, making notes about their arguments and their rows and their disagreements, and Napoleon winding him up, which he does all the time. I'm only about 40 pages into the whole thing, 40 or 50 pages into him, but their relationship is really amazing to read through these notes. It's almost as if this was the dialogue for a play that needs to be put on. Seriously, a dialogue for a play. And I just wanted to read you a couple of bits. This has got nothing to do with, this is me hopping off over into one particular space to just bring it to your attention about how different the times are with regards to the quality of life and what we think is important, things like this. So the whole of the lead up to going into Russia is a bit harem-scarum. It's as if Kolinkour had spent a year and a half in the court of, in the Russian court with the Tsar, Alexander. And they were good mates, basically. And he thought the whole idea of going into Russia was not good. But as obviously he was overruled in this, and he did his best as a stout Frenchman. But the whole thing kind of drifts towards it. If you get round to reading it, it kind of drifts to them marching into Poland. I just wanted to read you a couple of bits here. It's called Part 2, Advance, Chapter 3, First Blood. This is nothing to do with a battle, by the way. Okay, hang on. I just got a little note. Let me just go through this, and then I'm going to bring David in. It says, when the reconnaissance was finished, let me just make sure that this is okay. Yeah. Oh, hang on just a minute. We've had a little problem here. I can see what's happened. There we go. Right, there we go. Sorry about that, David. David's just waiting keenly in the background. Nearly finished, David. We'll have you over in a couple of minutes. Let me just go through this thing here. So this is from, as I said, First Blood. Let me just read you this little bit, very briefly. It says, when the reconnaissance was finished, Napoleon rejoined his staff officers and once more examined the different points to be occupied by the troops. As he galloped through the wheat, a hare started out between the legs of the emperor's horse, Friedland, and made him swerve slightly. The emperor, whose seat was poor, rolled to the ground, but got up so quickly that he was on his feet before I could reach him to give him a hand. He mounted again without saying a word. The ground was very soft, and he was only slightly bruised on the hip. It struck me then that here was a bad omen, nor was I the only one to think so, for the Prince of Neuchâtel instantly seized my hand and said, "We should do better not to cross the Niemen. That fall is a bad sign." The emperor, who at first had kept a complete silence, though his private thoughts were doubtless no more cheerful than our own, presently began to joke with the Prince of Neuchâtel and myself about his fall, but his bad temper and forebodings were obvious, despite his efforts at concealment. In other circumstances he would have complained about the charger which had caused this foolish accident, and would not have spared the master of horse. Now, however, he affected the utmost serenity, and did all he could to dispel the misgivings which he sensed that everyone must have felt. For men are superstitious, despite themselves, in such serious moments and on the eve of such great events. And it goes on here a little bit later where it says, the emperor sent for me after dinner and asked what had caused him to be thrown off the horse. He said he was scarcely hurt, but had got up so quickly that probably in the darkness no one would have noticed the accident. He asked if it was being talked about at headquarters. I found this quite interesting, really, that they were spooked quite easily by forebodings and omens. And you could say, I suppose, in retrospect, they should have paid more attention to it, because obviously we well know this jaunt, this adventure, this colossal campaign didn't turn out too well. One last little point just to mention here as well, a little bit later on. This is them just walking somewhere. This is the army. And by the time they entered into Russia, I think it totals 640,000 men walking. So they're talking about men walking and with horses, right? But they have to get to Vilna in Poland, and they got there very rapidly. This is one of the things that they did. They marched overnight and all this kind of stuff. And he just writes here, this rapid movement without stores exhausted and destroyed all the resources and houses which lay on the way. This thing about supplies. The vanguard lived quite well, but the rest of the army was dying of hunger. They've not even fought a battle yet. They're just walking along. Exhaustion, added to want and the piercing cold rains at night, killed off 10,000 horses. This is just walking. This is just marching. So they lost 10,000 horses. marching overnight to Vilna. Many of the young guard died on the road of fatigue, cold, and hunger. The leaders wanted these young men to rival the veterans who had survived so many toils, perils, and privations, and the youth of the army was thus the victim of misplaced zeal. It's a different world, isn't it? That's the reason why I just brought this in. It's just an adjunct. It's got no bearing really on what we're going to talk about for the rest of the evening, although it might have. But I just wanted to throw that in. It's an astonishing book, by the way. I've read quite a bit more than that. It's astonishing because of the intimacy of it, the direct communication of it, and it's a bit like reading a modern novel in many ways. It's quite a brilliant piece of work, and I was totally unaware of it. And I can understand now why McNair Wilson got so giddy about it when he wrote this book on Napoleon in 1936. And to draw the line into where we're going as well, the McNair Wilson's book touches on the fact that Napoleon is fighting against the system. I know we're led to believe otherwise, but he was, with regards certainly to these coalitions that were brought against him, this attack on a system that he was seeking to impose. I'm not saying he's a saint. That's not what I'm saying. I've yet to still learn more about this guy. But it is an astonishing life. Of that, there's no doubt. And the willingness that they all have to go to war over certain things is quite astonishing. Certainly, we are very, very different people to what we were 200 years ago, 220 years ago. And so there we go. Right. That was it for now. There we go. Opening 20 minutes. Done. I mentioned, of course, that we have a guest tonight, David Fleming. He's going to join us. In fact, I've got him on live right now. And David of the IndependentAlliance.org, welcome to the show. How are you this evening?
Yeah, hi, Paul. Okay, yeah, thanks for that.
I'm sorry about cutting you off there on the sound thing. When it kicked off, it does all these strange little things, and I just didn't see the screen, and I can see that you were muted. It was me going on about a few things which you didn't really need to know about. You can always listen back to them keenly. I was just talking about Guy Fawkes and a little bit there about Napoleon. It was just part of some historical threads that I keep running through the show. But we spoke, didn't we, briefly just before the show, first time we've spoken, and I was made aware of your site through a post. I think it probably was on a Richard Vobes video or somewhere else like that I'd seen, and that's why I got in touch with you, because, well, you're up to a few things, aren't you? And so it might be useful, I think, here. I don't know fully who you are, and I'm sure most of the listeners don't, but it's very interesting and intriguing what you're up to, certainly from going through the information on your website. So it might be useful if you just sort of say a few things about yourself, who you are, and, you know, like why you're behind the microphone right here and this project's underway that you're involved with.
Yeah, well, you know, how long have you got?
An hour and 35 minutes.
Yeah. It's just in case I get sidetracked. It's my first time on a radio with no video, so usually I look at the person I'm speaking to on the screen. I was telling you earlier about Richard Vobes. I was on his show back in January or something, and he switched his video off, and I'd been looking at it, and then I just ground to a halt. I was in midstream, then I ground to a halt. So just to amuse you, I've got a picture of Richard Vobes on my screen now, and I'm looking at him.
No, that's great. Well, I could do some charcoal drawings for you and send them over or something. I guess.
Yeah. So but yeah. So I'm just warning you that I may ground to a halt or something.
What do I do if you do that?
Why,
do I start shouting or something and remonstrating with you?
Yeah, just prompt me. I mean, I don't know why, because, you know, obviously I grew up using the telephone, you know, and you just sit there talking into the void there, don't you?
You do.
But yeah. So it might take me a minute to get into the swing of things. But yeah, no, I mean, I joke that I didn't work hard at school, so I didn't become a doctor or an engineer. I ended up getting just enough to get onto a science degree course, and I was offered 2 science degree courses. One was environmental health and one was applied sciences, and I had a friend in each of them who had already got the same course, and so I was just decided which friend I preferred at that moment, you know. So I'd sort of fallen out with one of them temporarily, so I ended up going and doing environmental health, which I never liked, I never enjoyed, and but I'm still doing it, you know, 40 something years old. I don't know, how long is it? Yeah, 38 years later. So environmental health is like a jack of all trades, master of none type of profession. I mean, it's sort of an environmental health officer could probably, well, not me, most of them could sort of knows everything about everything, Whereas I don't really. And ironically, I've been involved in through this. So I came to England in 1990 from Dublin in Ireland, and I've sort of been working in environmental health most of that time, which includes, pollution, like environmental pollution, like atmospheric pollution, air pollution, which is sort of relevant at the moment, and also public health. So environmental health officers are like the local public health. I forget what they even called now. That's the guy in charge of public health in an area.
Public health bloke, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember. But they would be in charge of the public health, and they'd have to chase up outbreaks. And environmental health officers would be so they're foot soldiers. Sometimes they might say, "Oh, there's been an outbreak of cholera in Hounslow. Can you sort it out?" So I used to do genuine track and trace from Heathrow Airport. People would come in and they'd be ill on the plane, and the doctor at Heathrow would notify us that somebody has cholera and they've gone home to their house, and then we track down their family and stuff to make sure none of them were working in food factories or something. Yeah. So genuine stuff. So I roll forward 30 years, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but I did track and trace 2 years ago for a London borough, because it was the only job around. But to cut a long story short, I didn't do it properly. Okay, so I never actually tracked anybody down. My contract ended very abruptly as well. So, but but that was track and trace for fictitious, reasons. So I've seen the real thing, and I've seen the made up pretend one. In between, I tried to escape to motor racing. So I've worked. I wanted to be a racing driver. That's sort of why I came to England in the first place.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, we're going to end up talking about motor racing all night here, David, if we don't watch it.
Yeah, well, I never did. So basically, I didn't have any money. So I decided to come to England and then try and become a racing driver without ever having done anything. So I've never raced a car in my life, or even a kart properly. So, but what I ended up doing was I got a computer back when nobody had computers, and I got a software package, and I started doing, learned how to draw. I was always good at art at school now. So I drew racing cars with sponsorship on them, to show companies what their car would look like with their name on my car. But within weeks, I ended up doing that for other people. So it started to turn into a business. So I'd draw a picture for somebody, to show what Coca-Cola would look like on the car, and they'd go to a meeting with Coca-Cola, that kind of thing.
What year is this then? What year is this roughly? When is this?
Well, it's 1994.
Right. Okay.
Basically, I drew my first picture. I sat down at the computer and learned how to draw the day just Ayrton Senna was killed. So that puts in perspective.
Gosh. So that's May 1994.
Yeah, May the 1st. So
I almost share a birthday with him. He was about 5 days older than me, or something like that. That was a day. Gosh, we're getting nostalgic about things, I guess. Yeah, that was a bit of a day. So, wow. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So, but within a couple of months of doing these graphics, I ended up working for the Williams Formula One team. So
did you now?
Later on in '94. And, so I basically worked for Williams for 8 years, and I went there full time in the factory for 2 years, which is good. I was there when we won the World Championship in 1997, the last time Williams won a championship. So that it might be my fault.
I don't think so. I don't think so. No, I'm not gonna. I don't think we'd do that really. They made a few errors, didn't they? We're going to get all sort of technical and sidetracked here, but I think they did. I mean, Adrian Newey leaving didn't help. Let's put it that way. So I think.
Well, I think that was the biggest reason, and that was deliberately. Yeah. Well, it's a really silly thing for them to do. But that's sort of relevant, because it means I learned a lot about marketing and graphics and all that sort of stuff, and then I got into the internet as well. So, but by the time all this stuff started 3.5 years ago, I was always working on. I was sort of working in environmental health still, but I was always working on a motorsport stroke internet project. I was trying to make money out of where motorsport and the internet meet.
Right. Yep.
And but then all this kicked off, and before 2020, I had been wondering how I could do something, because with net zero, Theresa May signed us up to net zero in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I thought that it was always been kicked down the road a bit. Like every government was sort of kicked the whole climate thing down the road.
Yes.
And it never seemed to stick. And then Theresa May signed us up to net zero, and I realised that this was a big thing, and I wanted to do something about it. So I sort of became a bit obsessed about what could I do. And I registered loads of web address, domain names and things of what ideas and stuff. But my main idea always came down to getting the information out to the public, because the mainstream media are just propaganda machines and gatekeeping machines.
Yes.
And so that's what it boiled down to, really. And basically I was asleep. I was like, I didn't know anything, despite the fact that I was involved in public health and air pollution and stuff. I didn't know anything about anything. And I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't care about politics at all. I just wanted to make it at motor racing somehow.
Yeah.
And so I literally knew nothing about politics, except I'd watch Have I Got News for You every Friday night, that kind of thing. I'd
yes,
laugh at
I did a bit of that too. Yeah, absolutely.
Mrs. Thatcher jokes or whatever, or whoever was in power would be laughed at. But I didn't know anything. And then one day I was just minding my own business, and I saw Tony Blair sent tanks to Heathrow Airport. Remember, in like about February or something, 2003.
Did he? I don't remember that. What did he send them there for? I can't remember.
Well, the reason was to scare us all into supporting the Iraq War. So there were tanks outside Heathrow Airport with guys sitting in the tank with their head poking out, that stuff, and it was all over the news.
Yeah.
And I just said, from zero, I didn't care about anything, and next second I go, oh, they're trying to scare us. Instantly realised, and I didn't know anything about false flags or anything. I just didn't care. But that snapped me, and then I just began sort of like a journey of waking up to various things. It took about maybe 6 years before I sort of ticked all the boxes off, really. But so the first one was war, false flags, then, not all that stuff. Then I got into how the world really works and banking and everything like that, and
all the fun stuff.
And I didn't really do much with it, because I thought there's nothing I can't do anything. And so when Theresa May signed up to net zero, I was just racking my brains trying to wonder what to do. But it still felt so big, that it's just me and the whole world. What can I do? But then in 2020, like March 2020, when all this kicked off, I knew instantly, because when in 2018, Extinction Rebellion appeared, out of nowhere, and they said, "Oh, we're going to send people to jail. This is going to be big." And I thought, okay, that sounds a bit serious. And then Greta Thunberg turns up.
Ah, yes.
And next second,
sorry,
my kids are getting the day off school on a Friday to go and do this, join these protests. I mean, my daughter came to me, she wanted me to sign a note saying, oh, I want to get Friday afternoon off because of this school strike stuff.
Right.
And I said, okay, I'll sign it as long as you don't go to the event, just go off and walk around the town.
Yes.
I didn't want to actually... fair enough, get the day off for free, but don't actually go anywhere near that protest. But then I realized things were happening, and then November 18, the US midterm elections were on, and the Democrats got in and got control of the House, and Ocasio-Cortez
Yes.
She appeared from nowhere. She just appeared from nowhere. She was newly elected. She'd been a student and a waitress before that. And then there was the very dodgy video of her dancing, which hit all the headlines. Obviously, completely set up to give her a sort of instant fame. And then she introduced the Green New Deal. She says, "Oh, I've got this thing. I'm sponsoring the Green New Deal. Blah blah blah," and that was getting loads and loads of coverage. And so, combined with everything, the Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, the Green New Deal, and then because she was saying things like, "Oh, there'll be no more flights ever again, and we'll build a bridge to Europe," all this sort of absolute crazy talk.
Yeah.
So by the time some people said, "Oh, well, it won't be that bad. We'll just be doing X, Y, and Z," it sounded more reasonable. So they shifted the Overton window, because if they'd said all this stuff at first, they'd have been laughed out. But Ocasio-Cortez comes in with this even more ridiculous stuff, and next second we're accepting what we now know to be net zero and the Green New Deal, and thinking that's normal. It's not as bad as the other thing. But then in March 2020, when they went, "Oh yeah, that's it. We're going to lock down. We're going to lock you all down. That's it." I just instantly knew that, as far as I was concerned, that they've got cocky now. They think they've cracked the net zero, like the climate thing.
Yes.
The whole Agenda 2030
Yep.
and the Sustainable Development Goals, all that. Instead of being kicked down the road, they've got the kids captured now. They've got the UK has signed up to net zero. The US are bringing in Green New Deal. So that's it. Everything's just the dominoes are just going to fall into place, and so and next second we're all being knocked down for a respiratory illness, and so I thought, oh yeah, they're confident, they're getting cocky now. They know they've cracked the climate thing, so now they're going to lock us all down, and it's the equivalent of beating us over the head with a stick, and getting us down on the ground and beating us, and then when they stop beating us and let us stand up, we'll just be happy to be in net zero. And that's what I thought of exactly the day one when it started. And I think that's probably how it's panned out, really. Because we're all pretty much, the majority of people are just like accepting all this stuff. And compared to what happened, the acute stuff that happened to us, it's sort of not that bad, really. And so when that happened, that all kicked off. Going back to your question, like why I'm here now. The whole fight back against lockdowns was tiny. I mean, there was almost nothing happening. So there was so few people in the UK, for example, sort of sticking their necks out, that it was easy to get to know them all. So I got to know Toby Young, because in April I set up a website called Lockdown Truth, and it doesn't exist anymore because I took it down because I was a bit OTT, and my second venture was more sort of credible, so I decided to get rid of the first one. But basically, I got, because I was producing articles and sticking them up, and then I'd get Toby Young, ask him if he could promote them on his Lockdown Skeptics website. Mm-hmm. So I got to know him, then he introduced me to Francis Hoare and other people, and I got to know Martin Kulldorff in May 2020, and then he went on to do the Great Barrington Declaration later on, which is quite good. And Mike Yeadon and Claire Craig. So I got to know these people, and before you know it, I'm mixing it with people. I'm getting some traction.
You're in there, yeah.
Right. and so I am. And then I started doing a lot of things, because the first thing I set up properly was in September 2020. I set up the COVID-19 Assembly, and that that I wanted to do what I'm doing now with that, but it was difficult to do it, so I didn't know where, because I still didn't know enough people. So I decided to do projects instead. So the first one I did was called the COVID Deaths Audit with Dr. Claire Craig.
Right.
And we announced... it was an ambitious target, and I still want to do it, but it hasn't happened properly yet. But it's called the COVID Deaths Audit. We wanted it because the whole COVID thing was sold on the fact that people were dying and everybody was afraid to die, so they're doing what they were told. And obviously, anybody with their, I don't want to insult people, but anybody with
Go
any
on,
critical...
get stuck in, I would.
If you had more than one brain cell, you know it was all lies. These deaths, I mean, they were literally telling us they were lying in one side of the mouth and telling the truth at the other side, about releasing statistics. And
that's what. Yes.
And every time you'd see it on the BBC News or whatever it was, because I never watched it, but they'd have in the corner deaths of any cause within 28 days of a test, They were literally telling us. But anyway, yeah, I mean, we all know that these deaths were made up. I mean,
we don't know what we know, really, do we? We don't know what we know. We just know that the people that actually provide apparent information, that's all they do. They provide information which apparently may or may not be true. It's
yeah. So we wanted to just get to the bottom of it and just show that these deaths weren't the deaths, because every day the deaths would go up. And this was spanning 2 seasons, so they weren't even halving it and saying, last season we had 80,000 deaths and this season we had 40,000. Now they were saying 120,000 deaths. It just kept going up and up. They eventually stopped it, but if they still had it now, it'd be like 5 seasons and still going up. It's just crazy. It was clearly all about scaring us. So that was the first thing, but we released a video of Claire doing giving a summary of what we were about to do, and we got 2 million views on Twitter in one day. It's quite.
Oh, that's quite impressive then. So you got colossal traction with that. That's tremendous.
Yeah. And so as part of that, because we were obviously wanted people to come forward with information, from hospitals and pathologists and everybody, we decided to set up a whistleblowing service, and a proper one. Because at the same time, there was actually somebody else, it wasn't serious, but somebody else set up an NHS whistleblowing service, which was, send an email here, and we promise not to tell anybody. Whereas our whistleblowing service, we had Francis Hoare, the barrister, was fronting it. We had our first solicitor on board, who was a pro bono, an employment solicitor, and we had a form on the website. And basically, if you wanted to whistleblow, you'd fill in the form, and the form would go directly to the solicitor, and we'd never even see it. And then the solicitor would, have that, client confidential agreement, and basically get in touch if they thought there was a case. And the first case we got from that was with Dr. Sam White. I don't know if you remember him. He was struck off or whatever, suspended by the GMC for tweeting about the vaccine, saying that it's not safe or effective, and they suspended him and said you're not to tweet about this anymore.
You're a very naughty boy. Yeah.
And basically we won that case, and
great.
And they had to reinstate him, and told him he can go back on social media and that. But that was quite a big case at the time, and it was like it was quite good. And then I'm going to use up the whole show just to introduce it.
No, it's fine. It's okay. No, it's really useful, because I've learned a lot about you in the last 25 minutes, and it's very useful. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, because of what I've been doing with the COVID-19 Assembly, I got invited into a room in July 21, which is a guy got everybody in a room together and said, what should we do? So it was, and everybody active at the time, like Lawrence Fox was there, and Us for Them, and Right Said Fred, and anybody who was sort of active, just trying to fight the lockdowns and stuff was in the room. And the guy in charge, I don't even like to say his name anymore, but he said, what should we do? And I got onto the steering committee. We agreed to have a steering committee, and I got onto it. But
this is 2021, this a couple of years ago, right? 2021?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it was the guy who got everybody into the room was Alan Miller, and he'd been involved in the nighttime industries. And his best idea was that we'd all send out the same tweet on a Friday. So I got onto the steering committee, and I put together a pitch, and I said, so why don't we call ourselves Together? Because we're all working together now. And we could have a declaration like the Great Barrington Declaration, only a step further, because that only covered shielding vulnerable people from COVID, whereas, we should be talking about much more than that.
Yes.
And I designed a logo and said how it might work and stuff. And the steering committee said, okay, yeah, let's do that. So they all voted for it. And that became the Together Declaration, which I don't know if you've heard of that.
I haven't, no, but I have now, yeah.
But that launched in August 2021. And we got 100,000 signatures in the first few weeks and 200,000 eventually. But to cut a long story short, and a couple of things happened at that point. A very wealthy guy got in touch with me because he'd seen the Claire Craig stuff and the Francis Hoare stuff, and said, "Oh yeah, I like what you're doing. I want to give you a bit of money." So he gave me £20,000 basically,
right?
And just when Together were launching, and I ended up spending all that money on Together. With I don't know if you ever saw the London protests in sort of August, September, October, the later part of 21.
Yeah, I know quite a few people who went on them. I wasn't one of them, but I'm aware of all those events, yes.
Because I got these placards made, the black and white placards saying no vaccine passports.
Oh, so it was you that did that, right? Okay, I get it.
Yeah. So I it's my idea. I designed them, had them printed, stored them all in my house, transported them, paid for them. And so that was me. And then, but at the same time, that rich guy also said he'd be quite interested in getting involved with some of the legal cases. So I knew that Francis Hoare and Stephen Jackson wanted to do some cases, but they don't do them unless they've got somebody to pay for them.
Really? Right. Yeah. That kind of figures.
Well, because
yeah.
Well, okay. Forget about their fees. That's a separate issue. But it's the indemnity. So if you lose, you can't take someone to court if you don't have anybody to indemnify your debts if you lose, because you might end up with a £400,000 debt if you have a judicial review and you lose. You have to pay the fees of all the bar, the legal team of the government.
Yes,
and so which is about £400,000.
Not much.
No, I mean clearly designed to stop people from having judicial reviews.
I think so. Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. Yeah, that sounds par for the course.
But the bottom line was we got 2 judicial reviews backed by this wealthy donor. So he ended up spending about £1 million. And the first one that. The COVID-19 Assembly, my group, was the case holder for it, and that was the judicial review into the decision by the MHRA, which is the body that approves, medicine in the UK. They approved the COVID vaccine for children, basically, and we were saying, we want that overturned. We want to, stop that decision, and so that was the first one, and the second one was against mandatory vaccines, and. Ultimately, both those cases were thrown out. But Together, that was with me. But the case for the vaccines, the mandatory vaccines, Stephen Jackson, the solicitor who ran the case, just sort of cut and pasted it and just redid it again. So using all the work that had gone into it before, just relaunched the case. And ironically, it was launched on the Thursday, and on the Friday, Sajid Javid, I can't remember, is that his name? Sajid Javid.
Oh, I don't know.
The health secretary,
something like that.
The UK health secretary, the next day admitted that the vaccine mandates were disproportionate. The mandates that for the healthcare workers.
Yes.
And that basically signed the death knell. And I mean, I think that it was a coincidence, really, but still, and that sort of took me up. But to cut a long story short, I fell out with that Together organisation. I won't go into too much detail, but it wasn't my fault. I did nothing wrong. Okay, and also they didn't agree with anything else, or they didn't believe in any conspiracies. They thought it was all just, it's all just cock up or just overreach,
Yes.
What politicians are like.
Yep.
Whereas I wanted to tackle the whole Great Reset idea. I don't like using the term Great Reset, but I'll
No.
use it for, to speed things up here.
I'm with you. I don't like it either because it's their language and they designed it. I call it the Great Train Set because that's what I think Klaus Schwab needs to be given. He needs to create a great train set and just pretend he's in charge, and then we'll all be happy, him and his crew, So, but that's just me being.
Well, I mean, I don't take him seriously at all. I mean, I don't consider him or the Great Reset as anything. I mean, they've just got the gig at the moment to promote this, whereas they could be gone tomorrow.
Yeah, they're the actors out front. They've got, this is their role. They've got some lines to say until they're useless, and then they'll replace them with someone else. Absolutely, he's a ridiculous figure. I mean, he's just ridiculous, particularly the ridiculous accent. I mean, it's just over the top. Yeah. It's just nonsense. Nobody can even possibly talk like that. It's mad.
Well, no, I forget who it was now, but quite a while ago, a couple of years ago, I heard some German guy being interviewed, and and he spoke English better than I do,
Mm-hmm.
And he said that it was, an educated German, and I forget, he was involved in anti-lockdowns to some degree, but he said that it was ludicrous that Klaus Schwab had an accident like that.
You know why, don't you? I mean, they've wheeled him out. He's supposedly an Austrian. I'm not really fussed one way or the other. But what they're doing is they're trying to evoke the idea of the evil Nazi scientist. That's part of it. Look at him. He's got a bald head. He's like Blofeld, isn't he? And he talks like he's about to choke on his own tongue all the time. He's ridiculous. He's very funny. But unfortunately, many people still take him seriously. He's a ridiculous character. He really is. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's been working in, for 54 years on this. You'd think some English would rub off on him, wouldn't you?
I once heard, about Henry Kissinger. His ridiculous is also put on. I've got no way of proving this, but I I'll really lay it on and go, no one talks like that, you silly oaf, stop it. But the people buy the act. Everybody's they're all actors, and if it works, why are they going to change it? People buy into it. Apparently, it must obviously transmit some idea of wisdom or thorough scientific thinking, because if they sound like that, and so you tend to not sort of examine their words because you're supposed to be impressed by his shiny bald head. I mean, Schwab's, I'm always banging on about his philtrum, the bit from the base of the nose to the upper lip. It's absolutely vast. I've never seen. Him and John Major should have a competition to see who's got the biggest philtrum ever. It's colossal. And I just sort of look at him and go, you're a ridiculous character. Go away. Are you supposed to be going to a disco with Feta Gruntbird or something like that? So, yes,
Yeah, well, that's why I don't take him seriously, because it's Agenda 2030, and the people who want it, they're our enemy. He's just the PR company, basically, that's got the gig to promote it for now, and he could be gone tomorrow. So I don't worry about that aspect. But just to bring you up to speed, then, so I thought Together was going to be sort of this. I thought that's what it was going to be, but
right.
It wasn't. It wasn't to be. So I decided to set up my own thing called Not Our Future. So I launched that about a year ago. And the very first thing we decided to do was, just after we launched, Oxfordshire Council announced they were going to split Oxford City into zones, traffic zones. And I thought it'd be a good, and there was a lot of uproar about it just before Christmas last year. Yeah. And I thought it'd be a good way to show what we want to do, the whole idea about getting information out to the public by leafleting the whole of Oxford City in one day with the truth about 15-minute cities. Because the council were saying, at first they were talking about it being for the environment, and then there was a huge backlash within days, and so then they backtracked and said it's about traffic, but it was too late by then. And so we did. I got 400 volunteers turned up in Oxford on a Sunday morning in the first week of January, and I got half a ton of leaflets delivered to my house on a pallet. And we delivered a leaflet to every house in Oxford City, that we could get into. We couldn't get into some blocks of flats and things like that, but basically we did the job, and everybody in Oxford knew the truth about 15-minute cities after we'd been, and it was a complete and utter success. However, it sort of the downside was it was such a big task, and Oxfordshire Council, because Oxford City has its own council, but the traffic is run by Oxfordshire Council, like the county council. So that's why it gets a bit complicated for, if you don't understand how it all works in the UK. But basically, so the county council said, this is going to go through whether you like it or not. And 93% of people didn't want it. So it was an absolute 100%, government overreach. These are supposed to be elected representatives. 93% of people didn't want it. And essentially, it was a United Nations policy. It was an Agenda 2030 policy, as being foisted upon the people by elected representatives who didn't care one iota for what the people wanted. And so it was an extremely successful event. We leafleted the whole of Oxford City in one day with the truth about 50-minute cities. And I ended up getting, I wasn't depressed, but I was very deflated for two reasons. I mean, one was the complete overreach of these politicians who were supposed to be representing people.
Yeah,
it was just disgusting. And the other was that, ideally, I want to get the message on loads of subjects out to everybody all the time. Whereas it cost £4,000 and 400 people and a month of hard work just to get the message out to one town on one topic once.
Yes.
Whereas I want that to happen every week in every town on every subject. And I just decided, that it'll be impossible. We could never do it. Not at this, not there and then. And so I decided that if we're going to focus on one thing, we need to focus on getting those politicians out. All of them. So we can focus on 650 members of Parliament in the UK, and that became my goal. Just if we get those out and replace them with people who we control, the people control, then we can stop all this crap. Especially because we're like the freedom and truth movement. If you want to, bunch them together like that,
yep.
We're fighting on hundreds of fronts. We're fighting like, vaccine passports, vaccine harms, lockdowns. Gas boilers been taken away, petrol engine cars been taken away. You name it. It's a million.
They've weaponized our own civilization has been weaponized against us. Every single aspect of it. They've looked at every single part where we're connected into civilized agreements, and they're abusing them. And we don't have a voice to reply with at all. The English and the people of these islands have got no say in their own life currently at the moment, which is why we have to talk amongst ourselves, which is a good thing.
Yeah. And if we do speak out, we're terrorists, we're racists, we're everything, you name it. And
I've said that to people. I've said that to quite a few people, David. I've said, "Do you think yourself a terrorist?" And no, I said, "Well, you're about to become one." Why? I said, because you're not a globalist. If you are not for their agenda, then every single abusive name you can think of, you're going to be called that. But I'm not that. It doesn't matter. They're going to call it you because they know it upsets you. So get ready. Brace yourself. Here it comes, That's what they're going to do. It's what they do. It's what they do.
And they sort of tested it with Justin Trudeau, didn't they? They got him to call the truckers every name you can imagine. And and he's the one who applauds Nazis, isn't he? He's
a ridiculous character. He's just a ridiculous character. He's a child. They've dropped them all in. If you look at the so-called leadership of the Western nations, if that's what we want to call, I think the Australians may still have some men left, but most of them are they're ridiculous. And that's by design. It's to demoralise most of the electorate or the people of these nations. They look at their supposed political class and they go, what? You? And really one of the reasons I suspect why conversations like this one are happening, not just here but everywhere, is that even normal people are going, I could do a better job than this. And it's no longer a figure of speech. It's true. It's actually true, because these people are working to deny us the things. They're not. It's not that they're supposedly representing us. They're representing the very things that we don't want. They're literally everything that we don't want. Yeah. They're pushing everything on us in that way.
Well, Yeah, democracy doesn't exist. I once had I made some placards after I left Together, and they included the phrase "Take back your democracy. Whereas I don't agree with that anymore, because we never had democracy in the first place, so we can't take it back.
I agree. David, we're going to go to a break. I'm going to take a little break. Don't forget about democracy, because we'll talk about it. After the break, let's talk about what the Independent Alliance is doing. And if people want to call in, we'll set that up. I'll provide some information on that, and we can run through for the next hour. What I want to do now is, if I have to press the right buttons here, I think I'm going to do that. Just want a little song. I ran a Van Morrison song the other week, by the way, and threw it up on YouTube, and they didn't reject it. Good old Van Morrison. It is copyrighted, but he's allowed people to use it, which is pretty good, because this is quite recent. Anyway, there's another one from him, because this is kind of, it's okay stuff. This is, you'll get the idea from the title. Here we go.
Gone, hiding behind computer screen. Where's the spirit, where's the soul? Where have all the rebels gone? Why don't they come out of the woodwork now? One for the money, two for the show. It's not very rock and roll. Where have all of the rebels gone? Someone else to make a move while they're sitting on the fence. Well, it's some kind of pretense. I'm not saying much at all. Where have all the rebels gone? Just a PR stunt. One for the money, two for the show. Where have all the rebels gone? Where have all the rebels gone? One for the money, two for the show. It's not very rock and roll. Where have all the rebels gone? Were they really all that tough? Or was it just a PR stunt? Saying very much, are they? Where have all the rebels gone? Where have all the rebels gone? Hiding behind computer screens. Where the spirit,
Attention all listeners. Are you seeking uninterrupted access to WBN 324 Talk Radio despite incoming censorship hurdles? Well, it's a breeze. Just grab and download Opera Browser, then type in WBN324.zil. And stay tuned for unfiltered discussions around the clock. That's WBN324.zil.
The views, opinions and content of the show hosts and their guests appearing on the World Broadcasting Network are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of its owners, partners and other hosts or this network. Thank you for listening to WBN 324 Talk Radio.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You're listening to Paul English Live here at paulenglishlive.com. If you head over there, you can connect it with Telegram groups and Rumble, which is the main place, with the main chat room there too. And that was Van Morrison with, you probably got the title, Where Have All the Rebels Gone? I think hopefully they're all here this evening, Rumble, and listening to this show. I'm here with David Fleming from the Independent Alliance. We're getting ready for part 2, and we've just been covering David's past, and now we're going to look at really at the present. Also, just to let you know that if you want to call in, not necessarily, you can call in now, but we won't take your call necessarily now. We're going to talk for a little while longer. But in your browser, which you can even set up on your mobile phone, you just go to paulenglishlive.com/call, CALL, and you will be auto-forwarded into the studio, and you'll be able to put some questions and have a chat a little bit later on. So we've got an hour to go. David, welcome back. Welcome back to hour 2.
Hi.
Yep.
Good to be back.
Yeah, good to be back. Oh, actually, I need to do a little bit more house cleaning. I haven't said everywhere that we're on. You know, we're on WBN324.com, WBN324.zil, ZIL for the Brits, ZIL for the Americans. We're on Rumble, we're on Odyssey, we're on Freefall Radio out of South Africa, we're on Speak Free Radio out of the United States, and we might even be on Global Voice Network as well, which is another network which I need to get some reference on. So we're all over the place, which is great. We want to be. And you were just talking then, David, about the cost and the time and the expense of making this communications project in Oxford with taking all these leaflets out to people, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But obviously, if you start adding the sums up and looking at the amount of time and manpower we've got at that level, it's a bit like, it's like World War One. They've just got more bullets than we've got. Is that what you were kind of leading up to?
Yeah, well, especially to try and start off from zero and do that isn't going to happen, you know. Mm-hmm. So basically, you know, I decided that we have to focus on. I mean, you know, if you go to the website, which is theindependentalliance.org, mm-hmm. you'll see the whole plan is there. But it's like I decided that we have to stop everything, you know, like not just Oxfordshire Council or Net Zero, like it's everything, like all these the bad guys, you know. Let's call them the cabal for now.
I call them all sorts of other things, but let's be polite and call them that, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's as good a word as any. We can do that, yeah. I mean, when I'm talking about the banking stuff here, David, I just refer to the money power. It's a good overall description of it, and you know, my sort of approach really is you've talked about politics there. I've tended to not look at it. In fact, here on this show, people have asked me about politics and everything. But I think it might be able to have an effect, but not necessarily in a direct way. But the indirect effect could be good. But then I don't know. I mean, the more I keep looking at all of these problems, and I've been looking at them for decades, really, which is a bit embarrassing, I suppose, but so have many other people, the more you realize that you don't quite know what it is that's going to shift things. But right now, the time has never been better for some kind of shift amongst people of a grassroots nature. I mean, I was mentioning earlier, you know, this thing about the French Revolution, right? And even the English Civil War. Those things were not grassroots events. The French Revolution is not a grassroots. The peasants did not rise up. They were not interested in any of that. It's completely organized by like cartels of paid enforcers and insurrectionists on all of these things. But the one that is natural, certainly here in this neck of the woods, that was a genuine uprising by people, it was a long time ago, is the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. See, it is a long time ago, right? That was genuine. Wat Tyler, Joanna Farrar, and John Bull, the mendicant priest, who was loved, these people were outraged. They were getting abused at every single level in the way that you're talking about, that I'm talking about, that most of the listeners here are aware of. All of these different areas of abuse: financial, political, the media, wars, the whole lot, the abuse of the services industries, of electricity and gas bills, the undermining of the house. This Austrian idiot, this actor saying you will own nothing and be happy. Well, it's fine, Klaus. We'll start with you. We'll try it out with you and your lot for 20 years. Let's see how it all goes, And it's every single area, So we do need a thing that addresses every single area. I mean, I think that's why there's been such an increase, a very positive increase in the amount of people communicating things. It's not that we're all necessarily over the target all the time, but you just think this is a good sign, the fact that people are beginning to get more vocal and move things. And that's really what happened back in 1381, which I'm sure everybody remembers, of course. But they were being worked to death. Literally, they were being worked to death. And, one of the things economically that I maybe mentioned it last week, and it's worth just repeat. I sometimes forget that these things need to be repeated. This is part of this communications challenge of sticking to maybe half a dozen key points and not moving from them. But this is just a sort of human piece of knowledge, which you'll be fully familiar with. My dad bought a house for us in 1962 when I was 2 years of age for £2,000. And he was the only person that worked in the family, and he was the only person that needed to work in the family to buy that house at £2,000. And we've had all this supposed technological and economic advance and all this other right, which they go on about. We've got all this machinery that produces stuff at the drop of a hat for 1/1,000,000th of the cost it used to take us, and yet now it takes a man and a woman to go out, and they can't afford to have children, and they can't afford to pay for their house, and they're under pressure and they're losing their houses, and they say, well, everything's great. Well, I think not. And I think, we don't want any of these things. So I guess this is, what you're doing with the Independent Alliance is pulling all these threads together in this particular project and approaching it through the political sphere, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your point about one man being able to pay for everything is exactly what we're sort of focusing on.
Yes.
I'll get around to that in a second. I mean, you like your history, and I'm not going to teach you anything new here, but you know how the sort of elections began in the UK, in the 1600s generally,
yes. Mm-hmm.
and sort of got a little bit of steam after that. Sort of, but by the 1750 around then, we had the two parties basically had sort of become, they weren't parties officially. It was just like two groups of people who were aligned, the Whigs and the Tories.
Yes,
and they were the only people who could vote in those days were landed gentlemen. So the only difference between the two parties was going back to like Guy Fawkes, was the people who didn't want the king to be Catholic, and the people who thought the king should be Catholic if it happens that way, because that's God's decision, And that was sort of the only difference between the two parties, and that kept going along for a while. The Whigs turned into the Liberals, and the Tories turned into the Conservatives, and that carried on okay. But there was a growing call for universal suffrage. Everybody wanted to vote, and it was starting to get a little bit difficult for people to like the monarchs and the people who control the monarchs maybe to keep that pretend status quo without giving the vote. So they'd already worked out the two-party system with the Whigs and the Tories, but they had to allow for universal suffrage, which included women and poor people basically. So you can see in the early 20th century, you can see the Liberals got split and basically disappeared.
Yes.
And Labour came in just around the time they gave the vote to the common man. And then it's been that way for the last 100 years now. So they perfected the system. So they weren't going to give us the vote until they perfected the two-party system and how to use it to control the supposed democracy.
Yes.
And so they were perfectly happy with that, and it's served them well ever since, because it's still working. And it's just so it's a complete scam, a complete 100% scam.
You're such a cynic, David. I can't believe I've got you on. It's outrageous, But I'm one too. Yeah, of course, it is a complete scam.
And then added to everything you mentioned earlier, all the things that are wrong. But so I sat down, with a blank piece of paper. And obviously it doesn't take long to come up with it. But the only, like you and I, and if we get a few people together, we can't vote Bill Gates out of anywhere. We can't vote Klaus Schwab out of anywhere because they're answerable to nobody. The EU, for example, is designed to be anti-democratic. You cannot get rid of anything. You can't get rid of the EU by voting them out. So you have to leave them. Like if everybody left at the same time, it'd be great, because they disappear. And that's sort of how they've tried to manage the world in the last 100 years. I mean, like the United Nations, we can't just stop the United Nations. We'd have to get our politicians to leave it and get all
Can't we do
politicians
that?
all over the world.
I dream about that. I mean, there's this the thing about the United Nations is there's been more warfare since it arrived than at any other point in history. I mean, they don't. The whole idea of even the phrase to me is in error. You can't unite nations. There's no point even. Nations are distinctly separate. That's what makes them great. It's like the natural diversity of the earth. The races create nations in tribes, and then you get these distinct cultures, which is real, actual, multiple cultures. There's no such thing as multiculturalism. There's just a mess, and it's all to do with proximity. It's more of a real estate problem, which is all it is. And of course, it's a complete con. Oh, we're all going to come together as long as we're in charge. Oh yeah, as long as we're in charge. Oh well, you see, we're not too keen on that. And then they will say, oh no, but look, you see, before the United Nations, all you nations of Europe were warring all the time. Yeah, of course, because the same forces that have put the United Nations into place were the forces that were behind augmenting and paying for all the wars. Wars are really expensive things to put on. It's the same mindset that we're dealing with.
Well, I mean, if I'm of the opinion from what I've read that World War I was started just to bring the League of Nations in, and that didn't really take off. So they had another go at World War II to get the United Nations in.
Yeah, it was definitely part of it. There was also Lord Grey. I don't know if you know about Lord Grey, but they were just cross that Germany were becoming economically very productive and challenging the by then slightly lazy approach, I guess, of the British. And when I use the term British, I'm not referring to people like me or normal people. I'm talking about the empire of the City of London. There's no such thing as a British Empire. I just maintain no such thing.
Well, Grey and Milner were like, sort of the bagmen for...
Yeah, they were.
Cecil Rhodes, and he was a bagman for the Rothschilds. Mm-hmm. So it's all linked. But yeah, they wanted to get rid of the German Empire because Rhodes particularly wanted a one-world government based on the British Empire, as the starting point, because that was all, splendid.
That's right.
So the irony that they're saying, oh yeah, it'll stop all wars. It was these were the wars that were used to get it in the first place.
Absolutely,
they started the bloody wars.
That's right. They created the wars to create the reason to have the United Nations. You need this now.
I mean,
it's even
you
worse.
Couldn't make it up. I mean,
they could.
So I mean, just very very quickly. I mean, you get these parties popping up like the Reform Party, who they had one valid reason to start in their UKIP phase. That obviously they're not UKIP, but the Nigel Farage UKIP, Brexit, Reform, trace the history through. But Reform aren't going to reform anything.
No, you don't think?
Yeah. So I mean, if you look at what their manifesto, it's a little bit of window dressing on net zero and stuff, but that's pretty much it. And basically, as I said, you sit down with a blank piece of paper and come up with a plan to get rid of all the bad guys, at the top. And you say the only I was talking to you about you and I can't vote the UN out tomorrow. We can't, blah blah. But what we can do still, I mean, temporarily at the moment, on paper, we could still vote out every politician and get our own ones in. We could do that. It's possible. And then
would we need would we need to get all of them out to make a critical difference, do you think? Because it's quite a few, isn't it? I mean, do you think?
Well, I'm just sort of going to say first, first principles, ideal scenario. I mean, obviously not all. We need a majority.
But you're saying, there's a route in. At least there's an area where people could actually do actions to begin to go in that direction.
Yeah. Like in Star Wars, when they're trying to defeat the Death Star, and they discover this exhaust port on the Death Star.
I do. I'm never going to forget that.
if it's hit at the right point, with the right charge, then it can destroy the whole Death Star. That's what voting is like at the moment. We can still do it, and if, for argument's sake, we got a majority in the UK Parliament, we could do untold damage. So let's just say that is a point. That's like, that exhaust port. Okay, now what we do from there is sort of the next chapter, but we won't talk about that right now. Obviously, we can repeal stuff and turn back stuff and uncover stuff and show the public the truth. So we mightn't change everything in one go, but we can get the truth out to the people and say, look, this is what they've been doing. We found all the receipts, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we could do a lot of damage in 4 years. Even if they ended up, shooting us all or something, or hanging.
Well, they probably would end up doing that. I mean, the history shows that is generally what they tend to do if they don't get their way. I mean, they might not shoot us; they'll probably just inject us with more vaccines. But so be it. Yeah, maybe it's down to that. It's that point in history.
So for argument's sake, let's just focus on getting there. Because I meet people all the time, or I talk to people, or I read about them, or whatever, and they think they have a plan, but they don't have a plan. They just have a wish list. They just have, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, well, obviously we need to do that, but how are you going to get there? Like, there's a big meeting on Twitter next week, or on X Spaces, that I'm on.
Right.
All about direct democracy on next Monday. Now I'm on it because I was invited. Hang on, what was my point? Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen on Monday, but I do know that I've spoken to people about direct democracy before, and they say, "Oh, we need a Swiss system, where people vote for, blah blah blah." And I say, yeah, fine, but how do you get to that position? How do you get there? That's all you're doing is just making an assertion that would be a good thing, but you're not presenting any way of actually getting to that position. So I had to work backwards. So let's say the goal is to blow up the Death Star, so we want to fire a torpedo.
A lot of blowing up tonight. We started off with Guy Fawkes and we're blowing things up again. I knew it was going to be an appropriate motif for tonight's show. Yeah. Let's suppose we're going to blow up the Death Star. Go on.
Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to get, a bunch of X-wing fighters with the right bomb flying down the channel, or whatever you call it. And so how are we going to do that? So you just work backwards to what you need to do that. So really, we need 650 candidates to be elected. So how do you do that? Well, you have to choose them, and you need people to go out and campaign for them. So I've come up with how this can all be done, and how do you pay for it? Now, it's all on the website, but it's completely achievable if you can motivate the public. Which is,
that one.
But
yeah.
But the whole point is, this is, as you mentioned earlier, this is a unique time. Because there's so many things all coming together at the same time, that make this a sort of the next election, which will be possibly next October, makes it a bit unique in that there's a lot of people who are suffering like pain. They've got pain points at the moment, which are, like cost of living, vaccine harms. They can't afford to buy a house. Their children can't move out. I mean, there's a million things. Like as we said earlier, there's all these different fronts.
Yeah, there are. There are more hot buttons than there have ever been, really. And people, it's a matter of. I mean, it's not so. People are fearful, I suppose, of change to some degree. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the sort of casual, common psychiatric analysis things that we all do. Oh, it's because of this and it's because of that. All of those things have probably got some truth in them. I think. No matter what would happen, I'm not necessarily convinced that a political victory could be achieved, but I think nothing but good would come of it. some good could come of it that none of us could even anticipate. I mean, at the moment, I think we were talking about this briefly, weren't we, just before the show, or I was anyway. We need a place for everyone of all, whatever their skills and talents are, where they can just gently or firmly put their shoulder to the grindstone and go, I'm contributing a little bit here. We need something that sends an invitation to a huge number of people, because people are going, oh, I couldn't possibly produce a video show or do these things or run a website. Most people probably can't. I mean, it doesn't matter. But they are being affected and their lives are being destroyed by this. I mean, one of the reasons of my little notes back to myself for me sort of doing this thing, and I'm not alone, there's gazillions of people doing these sorts of things, but for me it's happy families, which sounds trite, but actually if you look at everything that we need to create happy, thriving families, it's every single thing that you're addressing here. Every single thing that's going on in the world is actually moving against the possibility of achieving a good future for our posterity. In fact, it's against us even having a posterity if we don't watch it. That's how serious it is. And I know many people think about those things. I'm one of them. And of course, it's rather dark stuff. But it's grown-up time. It's strong meat for men time. It really is, you know. And we've got to deal with it.
Yeah, these are all the phrases I talk about. Because I mean, go to the website, you'll see everything. But like adults in the room, that kind of thing. Because there are so many. Once you sit down, so obviously I've got 3 phases here. The first phase is to get the whole freedom movement behind it.
Yeah.
The third phase is to get local campaigners out there, you know, making things happen. But there's a middle phase, and that middle phase is just to stop splitting the vote. Because every time another party comes along, they're splitting the vote. Mm-hmm. So as we stand now, the vote is split. So, you know, it's about, you know, there's a number of parties, a number of independents. They're all over the place. It's a mess, and they're all splitting the vote. So we need a central place for people to say, okay, look, let's join forces. You know, a bit like, you know, Churchill's ministry parliament during World War II. You know, everybody just sort of puts their differences aside and joins in. Because I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, there's parties. I mean, I met a guy a couple of weeks ago who's setting up a party. You know, and
there's many of them. There are.
Yeah, so you could. So we're different because we're not setting up a new party. We're literally trying to stop the vote being split. We're trying to get everybody to come together. Now, if you go to the website, you'll see that I talk about how, you see, it's somebody like Reform, for example. Mm-hmm. Even if they were completely on our side, but say they were, you know, George Galloway runs he's a firebrand, you know. I know you know who he is, but your viewers mightn't. He's sort of a firebrand, very left wing, you know, Workers' Party type guy who's very charismatic.
He is. He's very eloquent at times. He's got a good force about him when he talks. Yeah, he does. He has something. Yeah. Yeah.
So but that's his party is the Workers' Party of Britain, you know. Now, the Reform Party are, you know, pro-Brexit. I mean, Galloway was pro-Brexit as well, but visually you would say, oh yeah, they're very right, they're right wing, they're conservative, you know, that etc. So if somebody who would normally vote for Galloway isn't going to go over and vote for the Reform Party, and the Reform voter isn't going to go and vote for Galloway. So it's not like all these parties, and you could pick one of them, like pick Galloway's one, and then everybody vote for them. People won't do it. But if there was a temporary central place that everybody could just sort of take one step to, like just one step forward rather than 2 steps to do something sort of unnatural. So if everybody just goes into the middle, like the Independent Alliance, just for this one time, just once, you know, just take a chance, you know. Like
I think you're going to find whether it's almost like a natural thing with it. I tend to think these either naturally move well, a bit, not necessarily like a hot knife through butter, but say a knife through butter, or they don't. It's all to do with what the return is on the energy, isn't it, from a communications point of view. You can have brilliant ideas that are just not there at the right time. You can also have inept ideas or things that are simplistic that are at the right time and then lead to something better. I mean, I personally can't anticipate all these things. You look at certain things that have happened historically, and in certain cases there have been almost like synchronistic things have occurred which have suddenly shifted the momentum for nations very rapidly. I mean, I think it's different now. I'm not trying to be negative, but I'm just sort of observing, because of the sort of micromanagement of communication and the use of this technology by the other side in ways that it's not what we want. You know, we're having this conversation, I guess, to a great degree, and people are listening because for the last 15, 20 years, people with a question mark in the front of their head have been able to exercise it for the first time in history. We've been able to gain access to bodies of knowledge and books that really, before this technology, we didn't even know exist, let alone ask questions about it. You get these accounts written by people who go, I never knew that these documents existed. Let me read them. Oh, good grief, this is giving me a totally different perspective on what's going on. And, of course, there's a lot of us now, more than at any other point, have got that perspective, even though we're not necessarily on the same part of the hymn sheet. So maybe a clearinghouse is not the right phrase, but the Independent Alliance pooling people together. We have to find out what we've got in common. I know what it is, but I think a lot of people in England and Scotland don't want to talk about it because it's to do with race, which is a toxic topic. It's the foulest of all the Anglo-Saxon four-letter swear words at the moment. Oh, no, you can't talk about that. I mean, maybe I'm getting out of touch with everybody else, but I think that this is key. The reason why people are uncomfortable, they've been trained to not look out for their own. And things are very different. Life is very different. I remember what it was like for me as a kid in the 60s and a teenager in the 70s in the north of England. And it's very, very different to the way it is right now. So better? Yeah, it was better. In terms of community strength and connection between people, it dwarfs what we've got right now. And now we've got a lot of polarized people in very well-feathered sort of, prisons. You've got TV and you've got all this stuff and all that kind of stuff. So we've got a kind of situation trying to rouse people, which wasn't as difficult in the past, I suppose, even though, if you look at, say, trade unions and the like, they were all hijacked by commies. Ultimately, they were. They became a menace. It's a great idea, but then yet again, how do you stop? This is the great thing. I spend ages thinking about the banking system. I go, yeah, well, what we need a good bank of governors and all this. And then I go, there's a problem for you. Who's going to govern the governors? Who regulates the regulators? And so this is a challenge, and there have to be the reintroduction of certain penalties. I suppose what I would say, David, as well, is that the incumbent political class, irrespective of whatever party that they're in, and I'm talking really about the major ones, not the small ones that you've just been addressing, although some of those I think are red herrings as well, but the major ones, they've made their decision, and their decision is that they're for globalism. They don't have to say it. You just look by their fruits. They're for it. They don't come up with anything that is to actually serve the people of these islands. None of them do that. They don't do anything like it at all. So, I've often felt that interacting with these people is completely fruitless, counterproductive, and mad. It's like I believe that I'm going to affect them. No, of course I don't. I've analysed things. I've looked at them personally. I've gone, no, these people they're not going to listen to me. They will pretend to listen to anybody. So, but the idea of gathering our people together, the electorate on the ground, is the right area for me. My energy goes up at the thought of that, because it's the I'm a peasants' revolter. That's what happened then, and they nearly did it. If he hadn't got a knife in the back. Because he literally got stabbed in the back, literally, not sort of as a figure of speech. And that's because he trusted who he was talking to. He wasn't aware that these people will do anything to retain that. And that's the other thing that we need to be aware of, I think, is, part of me, I think, David, I keep thinking, I like the idea of rats in a sack destroying one another. I want to keep them all, that area, this globalist groupings, all these different we need to keep them almost in place so that they destroy one another. We've got to find the thing, because we can't do it, but it's a bit esoteric what I'm saying, but there's got to be that's like one of those possible byproducts from an action that you can possibly anticipate, that suddenly because they're not totally unified. If they were, they would have got this agenda achieved a lot longer ago, I feel. So they're not. They've just all got giddy with technology. Now that they can stick chips in everybody and all this, that, and the other, because they're useless, this is the height of their imagination about how to make life be managed here on the earth. And it's, their ideas are basically crap. They're very low grade, but they can get away with it because they've got this power. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. They're not very creative, are they?
No.
But yeah, I mean, I could. I mean, if you look at the website, I sort of answer all these problems.
Yes. I've gone through some of
how to make this happen. But one key thing is the fact that we would be different because, I would want to stop the whole, like the Bank of England, the City of London, all that stuff. I mean, that's where their power comes from.
Yes.
Is this the ability to create currency in debt? So literally,
we've got some really great people over here on the fringes of politics, or that have been in politics, that understand this. They're not many numerically, but they do understand it. One of the things I bang on about is, instead of being given a birth certificate when you get born, which is kind of like a receipt for your life for them to use, blah, 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 blah. We don't need to go into all the details, but it's part of the evil of the system. Babies should be given a share certificate in the bank, in the nation's bank, the bank of the nation. It needs to, the main problem is it's privately owned. And therefore, every single thing that flows from that space cannot be trusted. None of it. Economic reporting, financial reports, markets, we don't know. We literally don't know. No one goes, hey, it's 4 times a year the Bank of England open their books up and we do a 1-hour BBC TV news report. I've never seen anything like that. The ministers run around, don't they, saying, we're in charge of the economy. It's just a joke. They're not in charge of anything. They're like Schwabs. They've been given their lines, like you were saying. They have a role to play, and they do come and go. And what's that thing about voting? The problem with voting is it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always gets in. And there's a truth in that. This has been part of a great curse that we've had to endure.
Well, it's the government that the people who control the world want to get in. So, because
That's right.
I mean, the idea generally is that, there's loads. I mean, I've got, I've sort of sat down and addressed all the problems, I think. But basically, the idea is that they're independent. So, assuming we can motivate the public to get involved, because we'll start with the people who are already out there every day. The stand in the park, the people who distribute the light newspaper, the rebels on roundabouts. These guys are the ones that will seed these committees. And each committee will be essentially autonomous, except obviously they will have to agree to all our manifesto points, and we will supply them with information and on leaflets and how to get the word out there. But the idea is that will be the initial spark, and we wanted to get out into the public as quickly as possible, because say we get any traction, then they'll just come looking for me, or the people who are helping me. But if we have 650 committees out there with, say, 20 people heavily involved, that's 13,000 people straight away, and they'll have families and friends. So that could be like 100,000 people.
Yes.
So if the government turn up and say, "Oh, you are all far right extremists and terrorists,"
yes,
we're going to shut you down, then you've got 100,000 people who will say, "No, they're not. They're my brother, they're my cousin. We know these people. They're not far right extremists." So that could work against the deep state, if they try to do that. But at least it makes it very difficult for them to sort of clamp down and stop this if it's all sort of distributed out there. So that's why I want that to happen as soon as possible. And then the other thing basically is the fact that we're going for independence, and there'll be a number of, it's on the website, like things like, I mean, if you want someone to represent you in government, is it common sense to give the position to somebody who has already sworn an oath to another party? Like say like Freemasons or somebody who's already part of the.
What do we do with the Freemasons, crowd? David? What do we do with them? They're very powerful, of course, it's a kind of power. I hate saying that, but I'm afraid unfortunately it's true. And I think, but what I like about what you're saying, this is just me personally, right, is the idea of gathering that amount of people together around one project. The way I view it, it happens to be about this political process. But if those numbers of people could be gotten, if we can gather those, then you've got a communications base of people who are acting, and that's very, very strong. I mean, I don't know many people are actually in these political parties. It's not many. It's not very many at all, and you could easily dwarf. You could say, yeah, we've got the largest subscription base of any political movement in the UK, and that's something to sign up for. I saw on your site you had Darren from the Light Paper. There's a little article on him, and
Darren. I mean, Darren's fully supportive of the idea, and we're just going to get his volunteers who are already delivering the light to help set up our initial committees.
Fantastic.
And go from there.
Yeah, I get copies of that through local distributors here when I meet up for a drink every now and again. The copies turn up, and I've spoken to Darren a couple of times. I need to actually get back to him and speak to him about something if I can. He was very busy the last couple of months with his band or his new album and things like this. But and the way he's handled himself in certain interviews, I was drawn. He was in a BBC interview on the BBC, and they tried to do a hatchet job, and he handled it so well. And of course, what are we supposed to, the vitriol that comes out of these places is ridiculous. And it's all trigger language, and it's nonsense. A far-right extremist, that we don't have a far-right. I mean, the Conservatives, they're not right-wing. I mean, what are people talking about? And also, the other question is, what do they actually conserve? I'm hard-pressed. They don't conserve. They're worse than the Labour Party, which, of course, is by design, because they drape themselves in the Union Jack and swan around going, we are the traditional party of Britain, or at least that's the image that they seek to have people absorb. And I guess, to some degree, it's still pretty much that way. And yet you look at what they do, they're more rapidly undermining the base of the people of these nations than anything else. And by, what you're talking about, well, by extension, I think across Europe they need similar things. It's really strange. I've never voted in anything in my life, but I voted to leave on the Brexit thing purely because I believe in the strength. I don't trust European politicians anymore. Why would I trust them? I mean, I don't trust the ones that are just up the road 70 miles away. Why would I trust the ones that are in Brussels? It's a ludicrous proposition. And so I still, what we're doing here, this side of things is the big thing. It's the media to have this continual 24/7 pump out stuff, and people are gathering, and it is happening, and putting these things together. But we're also going to have to be nimble, because like over here, they've just passed this thing, the Online Safety Act. And you probably feel a lot safer, David, right now because it's been passed. I know I do. I ran around with, I feel so much safer now that the government is here to make it safe for me to be on the internet. I mean, these people, how do you reach a mentality like that? You can't. I've no idea. I've no idea how to reach people like that. They're unreachable, it seems to me. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, my plan involves not reaching them. We're not appealing to them.
I'm with you on that.
Asking them for,
that's good.
Yeah, we're not asking them for anything. We're just asking our own people, the people on the street, the people in our local communities. We're asking them to vote for us.
Yeah.
And we're not asking the government for one single, penny of anything. Not so yeah, because they've shown that they are worthless, and they don't deserve anything from us. I mean. Let's face it. I mean,
yeah, they don't.
If you look at the website, as I keep saying, because
that's where everybody should go as well, David. Right? If people want to get connected and hooked in, they need to get over to theindependentalliance.org, don't they? That's where they need to go and go through the information and make connection that way. Yes.
But the whole point of the whole point is that I want to get rid of the big cabal, right? I've chosen the UK as the first place for a number of reasons. Because one, I live here. Two, it's right.
Based here. It's based here.
Yeah, and three, it is. The seat of the problem is based here. So if we can crack it here, we can crack it anywhere. But this is still a call out for the whole world to join in, to help us in our struggle and also to do their own as well. Because so I wanted it to be a worldwide thing.
I'm with you. I think this is all the right thing. Yeah, I absolutely.
Because we want to drive them out. We want to give them nowhere. Because they have worked out, through centuries, but certainly in the last 100 years, and increasingly in the last 50, and even more so in the last 25, they've worked out how to influence us. How to work us, put our strings. They've designed the systems to do that.
Yes.
So we have to cut off so they've allowed, like I said about the exhaust port and the Death Star, that it's still a chink in the armor. So it could be done away with. We could get rid of them that way. But the way Keir Starmer is, if he gets in, he's got his New Britain manifesto, which is written by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, basically, and they're trying
it gets worse. It gets worse. Oh my Gideon. Yeah.
And they're trying. It's like they've seen the Death Star plans and they know the weaknesses there, and they're trying to get rid of that. So they're going to introduce devolution and decentralization of powers. Mm-hmm. That would mean that if we do get a majority in government in the future, which is our plan now, we won't necessarily be able to make changes. So and it's sort of devolved around. So you'd have to have control of every city, every council, every MP in the Parliament. You'd have to have everything to make change. So it's like they have seen the Death Star plans, and they've worked out that there is a weakness, and they're going to try and get rid of it. So that's what makes this even more urgent this time. Is we need to get cracking. Now I'm an optimist at heart, and I'm aiming to win this next year. But let's face it, maybe we won't. Okay. So we'd have another 5 years, or another 4 or 5 years, to keep on building. But if we make progress, I mean, you've seen how they do back down and try and change their plans if they're getting resistance, because they're still at the stage where they don't want to be seen. There's all this plausible deniability and propaganda and PR stuff that I'm nudging them, and the average person won't notice that they're being, absolute, shysters. But we do, because we're the few at the moment. But so if they get resistance, they do sort of back down and change tack a bit to come at it a different way. So what we do is we try and win this time next year. If we don't win, we do enough to make them change tack, so they don't bring in this New Britain manifesto. They don't make changes. We prevent that, and then the next election, maybe by then we'll have enough to win, and so on. I mean, when I was doing my research into the political parties, like I said earlier about the Tories and the Whigs, and for 250 years of parties, I was looking at all the how many seats were won by all the different parties in every election and all through those, and I made a graph, and you can see there's two other parties cropped up. The first one was, you'd see that the Irish, because the UK came over to Ireland, took over Ireland, in the Elizabethan times or whenever it was, and ruled Ireland for like 400 years or whatever. Yeah. I mean, I should know, it should roll off my tongue better because I did it all in school, but when you look at all the parliaments and the votes and the seats over the years, you could see this little green band growing, and it was the Irish question. And basically, it was like Brexit. It was sort of the same happened with Brexit. It was like this question pops up, and people are starting to say, "Oh, hang on, we want Irish independence." I was like, "We want to leave Europe for Brexit." Mm-hmm. And you see that it grows and grows over about 5 parliaments until eventually they got their way, basically. So the Irish question grew and grew until eventually it was dealt with, and Irish got their independence. Debatable. And then the same with Brexit, which is debatable. And ironically, they're both come down to Northern Ireland, don't they? Both of those problems.
Yeah, it's interesting that they do. Yeah.
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 So we could look at this. I wouldn't want it to last as long as those, but. No. It could. So this could be that same idea. A new colour appears on the chart and goes up and up and up until we get our way. And I think we need to do that. And I think we need to start. And like you said earlier, and we talked earlier, and obviously it's my plan because I've drawn diagrams on the website. But yeah, a central hub where anybody can join in. Parties can join. The freedom movement activists can join. Anybody can join. If all you can do is deliver 10 leaflets a week, then you've got a place. You've got somewhere, and it's a central place. And anybody who says, "What should I do? I want to do something," I said, "Go there. That's the place to go, and you'll find the way that you can make change. And it's a central place to come. And then we just build, and make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And every day it's bigger, and then we get to that point where we do win. And that's my plan. That's what I've come up with, and that's what I'm working on. And
it's as good a plan as any. It's as good a plan as any. I mean, there's all sorts of things I could say. Oh, well, what about this and what about that? The mind jumps all over these places, and you've probably got them too, right? But the thing is that it's better to do something than to do nothing at all. It's something about acting, because obviously we're living this kind of intellectual life at a distance over the internet. And I'm very thankful for it. I'm very, very thankful for it. But I'm also really aware that it's not sufficient. We're not going to change it just through that. But we've got access to technology that enable us to connect with people instantaneously in these islands and elsewhere in the world in a way that we never would have had. Well, we didn't have before. You just couldn't do it. So that's probably one of the reasons why they're accelerated their agenda as well, because we can act in a more dynamic way if we can get our act together. And if this is a sort of vehicle, if it's this or something like this that does it, that's all to the good, so that there's a role for people and they can get concerned again and maybe see that their voice might have some weight. And of course, I think at the base of it all, David, as well, you've talked about addressing the whole kit and caboodle, the cabal and all this kind of stuff. These are nasty people. I say that based on, by their fruits shall ye know them. You and I don't go around planning wars and trying to kill people and dominate and boss everybody around. I'm not in the slightest bit interested. I think people that want to do that are weird. Not only they're weird, they're a great menace. Many of them are very, very clever. I know that. And they're trained. And you were talking about how they press our buttons and everything. They have bodies of knowledge about how to manipulate large-scale civilizations and stuff, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. They've learned this stuff from the Roman emperors, probably from the pharaohs. I should imagine they've still got access to this stuff. Seriously. But obviously we're alive today. We have to look at what we can do. I think, for me, it's always been about the money power, because I operate on the basis that the money power is dictating what the government can and cannot do. And the government pretend that they're in charge because they're told by the money power that it works for them to pretend that they're in power, and they'll look after them, don't you worry. But when it comes down to meaningful decisions about finance and about how to really organise it, they're nowhere. And you just have to point to these obvious things like no one who's ever gone to school in England since I've been going to school, and before that, has ever been taught about money and banking. And they're not taught about it today. And you go,
absolutely.
Why are they not taught about? Why are we not taught about how central banks operate? Even on degree courses in economics, they don't spend any time on it. I mean, it's a joke.
Well, it's like, have you seen that new?
We've got about 8 minutes,
Peterson
just to let you
thing.
know. We're drawing to a close. So if there's things you want to say in the last 5 or 10 minutes, we're just about there. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. If you're not talking about the money system. Mm-hmm. And what we're what I'm talking about. Yep. Then you're part of the problem. Either because you're ignorant or you are literally one of the bad guys. But I mean, have you seen that the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship?
No.
Jordan Peterson.
Oh gosh, I just saw something about it this afternoon. Not had a chance to look at it. Is it a sort of another cul-de-sac? It's a way of diverting energy into another black hole. Is that what it's going to be?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I didn't have any confidence in it when I first heard about it back. I think I heard about it back around March, and I thought, oh yeah, I know what that's going to be like. But it's even worse than I thought it's going to be like. I mean, it's literally run by the people who own GB News, the Legatum Institute. It's a trust fund, not trust fund, a hedge fund, set up by a guy who he set it up with 25 million from George Soros, And they also
why
get
don't we write to
from
George? Do you think George has bung us 25 million? George, why don't you do something decent? Oh, you can't. You're a lunatic. Sorry for wasting your time. Yeah, go on, sorry.
They also get money from Bill and Melinda Gates.
Oh, great. That's good. It just sounds fantastic.
But basically, all they did was talk, and not once did anything serious come up about the financial system or the legal system. They're just talking about society and blah, 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 all that sort of, rubbish. Absolute nothing. So, I mean, there's some people on our side, skeptical people like us too, think it could be an effort to actually get rid of the WEF and bring these guys in as a sort of a more people-friendly WEF. But they'll still...
in one of those documents, the protocols, you're familiar with the protocols? I won't say anymore, but if you are, one of the things they talk about is destroying the population's belief in all of their elected officials. We're at that point, right? People are demoralized and disconnected from a bunch of people who are obviously not doing anything for us in a way that is so extreme compared to previous governments that it's just obvious to people that, well, obviously not to everybody, but to a huge number of us. And they talk about basically creating a solution to that, which we will all run into the arms of. And what you're describing here seems to fit that pattern. Peterson, intellectually gifted and articulate though he may be, and he does make some fine points intermittently, like a broken clock. He's right every now and again. I saw a picture of him years ago in his flat, and on the wall there was a picture of the Russian Revolution, and I just went, "You're in the bin, mate. I'm just going to treat you with kid gloves because you don't put pictures like that up on the wall." If you
I saw that picture as well. Yeah,
ridiculous. Schwab's got something similar as well, hasn't he, on his wall and stuff? So,
I mean, I've actually got a picture on my fridge, a poster of Marx, Lenin, Mao, and somebody else. But I've got it up there ironically. I don't want
throw darts.
So if you ever see it,
you better not get that in the thing. I'll read it wrong. I'll get it all wrong. I go, oh no, I talked to David Fleming. He's a bad one. This is really, really bad.
But clearly, I mean, we know how serious he takes his image. So obviously, he would have wanted to be seen with that picture.
Yes. Sending out signals. And there's one where he's confronted, I think the best thing ever. Like I said, he's obviously a very bright guy. I mean, it's be foolish to say otherwise, but there's something not quite straight about the way he's batting. And there's a bit where he was interviewed on the stage once where someone asked him a question about the Russian Revolution, and the direction the question was going and he didn't like, and I won't go into it anymore right now, but I knew exactly where it was going, and he just walked off, couldn't deal with it. He just go, right, well, you're about as useful as a chocolate teapot. I mean, it's a joke. And yet he's absorbing all this attention. So this is the thing. It's even the alternative media is not anymore in certain parts. They've put their people in who are getting well paid to do all these sorts of things, So
well, that's because GB News is funded by these people. It's owned by them. But everybody who took onto the stage at ARC that I can see, I mean, I didn't watch it. I just read commentary. Are the sort of people who don't believe in vaccine harms, were quite supportive of vaccines, but didn't like lockdowns, those people. So there we go.
We're right at the end, David. We're right at the end. We're going to go to some music in a second or two. It's been great having you on. You're welcome back at any time. Not next week, of course, because we'd all be a bit exhausted with one another by then. But I'd like to stay in touch as well to see how things go. And I think sort of, if you can make it back at some point in the future, that would be good to get an update on where things are happening with this.
Definitely.
And I'll be paying more attention to it. It's been great talking and covering all these different topics. So, theindependentalliance.org, everyone. That's where you need to go. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's flown by. Yeah, thank you.
It has.
I'll definitely come back for an update. Yeah, if you want me.
Oh yeah. No, that would be great. And you got used to the idea of not seeing anything, so you're in. You're in radio now. You're in radio.
I'm back in old-fashioned telephone mode. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the outro music for the last minute or so. You've been listening to Paul English Live here at paulenglishllive.com with the guest for tonight, David, who's with us from Independent Alliance, David Fleming from independentalliance.org. And we've been talking about how to smash all the baddies to pieces, and what we need to do to give many of our people good things to do to go in the right direction. So lots of work ahead for all of us, isn't it? Isn't it marvellous? David, it's been great having you on. I've really enjoyed it. Time's flown by.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Bye.
Wonderful. Bye for now. Bye, everyone. We'll be back again next week at the same time here on WBN324.com, WBN324.zil, Freefall Radio, South Africa, SpeakFreeRadio.com, the Global Voice Network, Rumble, and possibly Odyssey, although I think Odyssey is limping along quite badly. Till then, have a great week, and I'll see you next Thursday at 8 p.m. UK, back to 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Mountain, midday Pacific. Bye for now.